Recently, one of my friends and peers, LoGrasso, posted something very insightful on Threads. And by the way, you can follow her on Threads at LoGrasso. I've linked to it in the description. But I want to read what she wrote in full, and then I want to really break it down, examine it, and the nuances and how you can apply it to your own creative endeavors. Okay? So, without further ado, here's what she wrote. Indie creators, start thinking and creating like rich people. I'll explain. Several years ago, I was working as a creative coach to a multi-millionaire. We discussed her project, its production needs, and the cost. We estimated it would take around $20,000 to make. Chump change for her. At the end of our chat, she said, okay, now we just need to figure out how to pay for it. In my head, I was thinking, what do you mean? Open your Bank of America app and it will be paid for. But I decided to stay silent and figure out what she was talking about. She continued, you know, we need to get sponsors, investors, etc. before we can make this project come to life. It was at that moment that I realized something. Rich people don't spend their own money much at all, and they definitely don't spend it when they're making something new, whether it's a business, creative project, or political campaign. That is how they're so rich and keep getting richer. Ironically, as an indie creator / non-wealthy person, I had always taken the exact opposite approach. Be my own investor. If I don't have the money, I don't make it, or at worst, I go into debt. This was a wake-up call that we, especially as indie artists, need to approach our creative projects like rich people. We may not have the wealth or influence, but we need to use what we have and do our best to avoid spending all our own money. This is a losing game. Spending all we have to create so leaves us further depleted, often bitter if things don't go to plan, and puts undue stress on what we're creating. So, what can you do to take this approach? Of course, there's crowdfunding, but there's also grants, corporations interested in aligning with your work, nonprofits, and even wealthy individuals that you may know or be aligned with that would be interested in your project. Does this add another step? Yes. Is it worth it to try? Yes. Take it from me, an indie artist who used almost all of my spare money in my 20s, early 30s to fund creative projects and ventures. Please try to get investors. It will put you in a better position spiritually, emotionally, and certainly financially to launch your project into the world. There's a reason artists used to have patrons. This era shouldn't be any different. We have the tools and opportunities to secure funding without depleting ourselves. By thinking like a rich person, you may not only preserve your resources, but also open up a network of support that can propel your work to new heights. So next time you're ready to bring a project to life, don't ask yourself if you can afford it. Instead, ask, who will invest in this vision with me? Embrace the mindset of abundance and collaboration and watch your creative endeavors flourish without the burden of total financial strain. Remember, your creativity is priceless. Treat it as such, and let others share in the value you bring to the world. By adopting this mindset, you're not only funding a project, you're building a sustainable future for your art and your life. So remember, indie creators and artists, start thinking and creating like rich people. So there you have it. That's her words there. And I have to say, I very much agree. You know, it's in line with how I try to approach things. Certainly with my latest project that I'm working on. You know, I have a phrase that I often talk about and advise other creatives where most of them are stuck thinking of all the things they don't have, right? And part of what Lauren's talking about, and she addresses it, is switching that mindset to start thinking about what you do have, right? What is in front of you? And oftentimes, as artists in general, I find that we are resonant to just ask anyone for anything. You know, even our friends, for feedback or something like that, as if they'll be offended that we ask for a favor. Well, we need to get out of our own comfort zone and start looking at it like that. One of my dear friends, Khalil Abdelrahim, he talks about, listen, there's money out there, right? And it's going to go to somebody. So, you know, why not find a way for that to be you? Now, I will admit, you know, for me, I've been lucky enough with the past 2 projects that I've done crowdfunding, and they were successful in their own right, but never in terms of, even in this example, like $20,000, like, to get to that threshold takes a lot of work. I don't have the platform, the following, but every time, at least it took some pressure off. Each of my projects so far has needed an influx of cash from my own pocket. And, what Lauren's ultimately talking about is not necessarily, at least as I read it, that, at a certain point that you don't need to self-fund necessarily. But exhaust these opportunities first, and then try to make up that difference. At least that's how I've approached things. And part of my approach too is, okay, what's the most ideal way for me to do this? And let me try to attain that. And if that doesn't come to pass, what's the way I can still bring this project to life that is worthwhile, but do it much more cost effective, right? So I have the ideal, where money essentially is no object. And then it's like, all right, if we had to quote unquote bootstrap this project, what would that look like? And sometimes, even for me, it might require a pivot. So let me give you an example. There was this one movie that I've been working on in years past, and to bring that to life required too much. And granted, I could have gone ahead and done, grants or applied to grants and stuff like that. None of it was necessarily a guarantee. But it was an arduous road that I didn't feel was worth taking with that project. So, and part of that also was, as I was thinking about it, like, it was like 50-50, where it was very visually arresting, hence why it made it a good movie. But then the other half was very heady and really lended itself as a book. So I had made the decision, okay, I'm not going to get I'm not going to go out and get the funding for this as a movie. Let me instead pivot this project to be a book instead, and that'll cut down the cost tremendously, and I can bring it to life in a very special way, because it can, a book itself can be, I love literature, I love reading, and so if done right, this can be something breathtaking, right? And it could be my second novel, and it could be wonderful. And the good news off of that too is then, okay, in the ideal, let's say that book is successful, then I could eventually turn it into a movie or a TV series or whatever, right? Things get adapted all the time. And if not me, then somebody else, and, I get the money. And I still have I've still birthed this project that I wanted to from the get-go. And so that's what I've been doing with that project. So sometimes it's looking at it in a different way, and knowing how you can sort of approach that, right? And also too, it's like a lot of these things, part of it is I liken it to Shark Tank almost, where I watch a lot of those episodes. And the people going in, some people have already very established businesses. Other people are kind of starting off. But at a bare minimum, in order to have, as I see it, any success in the tank, you need to have at least a minimal viable product. And so, in order to get some of this stuff done, will require at least something in the sense of, okay, I can talk about films. That's what I know mostly, right? So when it comes to a film, if you're going to go out and do this, then having stuff, material, the script, a treatment, a pitch deck / lookbook, maybe even a proof of concept that's like, it could be a short scene from it or a trailer, like whatever it can be that helps people understand this. Because, as an indie artist, it is difficult to get buy-in on your ideas because part of it is you don't have that track record. And the business being such as it is, even people with track records don't always get the yes. So, we have to sort of fight for every scrap, but I think there are more opportunities than we give ourselves credit for. Like, in terms of filmmaking, I think we just think there's this traditional sense that, okay, we go to towards the studios and we pitch the studios and yay or nay. But there's plenty of other opportunities. Lauren mentioned grants. There are so many grants out there. In fact, a lot of my favorite movies, whether, I look at The Worst Person in the World that came out a few years ago. Wonderful, wonderful movie. That was heavily supplemented with grants. So there are opportunities out there. We just have to sort of expand our horizons in that regard and dare I say, get a little creative with how we approach the funding. The other aspect too is, there's crowdfunding in the traditional sense, but I think also too, I remember the first couple of movies that I made literally in high school, right? Were in part funded by, people that I just knew, like dentists and doctors that, make a decent amount of money, may not be able to give you, $500,000, but, it's like looking back on it now where I am in this journey, and this is definitely something that I'm thinking down the road, if needed, that, people that I can reach out to that are in fields where they have a bit of affluence, and while they might not be able to write, like I said, the $500,000 check, if I can get enough of them to write $5,000, $10,000, maybe more if I'm lucky, and in return they get to, have a producer credit, be involved, we underestimate, there's a class of people that have, these comfortable lives and want some excitement in their life, and they would be willing to pay a certain amount of money in that respect, to be sort of involved and be on the periphery and say hey, I'm a part of this project. So that's all available to us. Now, the one thing I want to caution in terms of all of this is we all have to have a starting position. I think too many times, notice that when I'm talking about some of my projects, I start with the ideal and going after it, right? But I do have ideas in place if those don't work out. And just in general, for all of us, that might mean a certain project might have to be shelved for a little bit. Because I think too many times we try to bypass the stepping stones. We want to, we're in a starting position, but we want to already be at the finish line. And be making the latest Marvel movie, right? Whatever it is. And it's we can't do that. Even the Russo brothers, who are very successful, having directed multiple Avengers movies, started off as comedy directors, and all the projects they did. And so when we look at mimicking our heroes, we have to know that they also had a starting position. And so that is to say that some of our creative endeavors have to match where we're at in our journey. And that can be tough because it's a reality, but like with the first two movies that I made, I very much catered the first movie to be as low budget as I could, and the goal was, can I just finish a feature film? So I looked at, very specifically, what are the resources that I have to be able to pull this off? On a scale that is good, right? Like can be enjoyable and have some heart to it and showcase, my talents as well as everyone else's, but also in a way that doesn't break the bank, right? Where I can cobble together the funds for this, with myself and everybody else. And we did that. Then with the second movie, it was a step up, but it was an upgrade, but we still kept it relatively contained in certain aspects. Smaller cast, very much non-action movie, more of a, drama, in terms of people's relationships, so it was much more human in that respect. And that's what worked for that movie and allowed us to create a really good movie. A step up from the first, but still, you can see the through lines there. Now, with my third movie, there's certain aspects that I picked up along the way through those movies, as well as everything else that I've been doing, that I'm like, okay, now I have a bit of a track record, and I'm ready. I've grown as a storyteller. I'm really ready to go to the next level, right? So all that to say is you have to find your own stepping stones through all this and utilizing this, because with all due respect, if you're an unknown talent, it's going to be very hard to prove to anybody that like someone should write you a check to make a movie for $10 million, let alone $60 million, right? Even the Wachowskis, when they made The Matrix, essentially, no one believed in them. Like people read the script and thought it was a good script, but they didn't trust them to make it, and so forth. Like you can read up on that whole journey. It's a very arduous journey. And so instead, one of the things that they did was they wrote and directed this movie called Bound. And it was made for like $2 million at the time that they managed to get. And it's this really sweet gem of a gangster movie. Like it's truly an insane movie in the best ways. And you could see like even just like a dialogue scene between two people, the way they approached it in terms of the cinematography and the writing and the acting and even the editing, like all this stuff elevated it to a whole new level. And when people saw that, it proved that, okay, these people are worth taking a shot on. And that's how they got The Matrix. But even those, even with The Matrix, there were certain restrictions and whatever. And they kept having to prove themselves, little by little. And once the dailies started coming in, that's what gave everyone else, especially at Warner Brothers, the sort of, okay, I think they got this. So, yeah, I know that's a lot to take in, and the second half might seem divorced from the first half, but, ultimately, the idea being that you want to make progress forward, because I know too many people that maybe try to think like a rich person, where it's like, okay, I'm going to go out and get money, and maybe they don't, and then they stop. You have to find a way to keep momentum going, and part of that means recalibrating your ambitions to what is available to you. So I echo everything that Lauren wrote and just wanted to kind of add my own sort of input and nuances to it to be additive in terms of helping you all out there approach your projects. I hope this helps. As always, comment down below with any thoughts, questions, or hit me up on social media at Svitek. And once again, Lauren's social media is at Lauren LoGrasso. I've linked to it down below so you can follow her along. And she does a wonderful, wonderful podcast called Unleash Your Inner Creative. It's an award-winning podcast. It's wonderful. Would highly recommend it. So check that out as well.